Reporting. Now, what happens if you confront an intruder in your house? The law currently says that you can use reasonable force against them, but the recent prosecution of Munir Hussain, who attacked a man who'd broken into his home, has thrust that law back into the centre of debate. Well, the Conservatives say they'll look at changing it to allow all but grossly disproportionate force. But what does that mean exactly? Well, with me is the Shadow Home Secretary, Chris Grayling, and Michael Wolkind QC, the barrister who defended both Munir Hussain and the Norfolk farmer Tony Martin, who was prosecuted in a similar case. And both of you, thanks very much for coming in. Chris Grayling, let's be clear, will you change the law on this?
Our intention is yes. We're going to review the current law when we come to office, if we come to office after the general election. We will certainly look at the test of grossly disproportionate. We'll also look at what's happened in the Irish Republic, where they've been introduced tighter rules to protect householders, but it's certainly our intention to change the law. Yes, it's in our draft manifesto published this week.
What is there left to analyse? I mean, the law is static. You can see what it is. Why can't you just give a straight answer that you will change the law?
Well, we will change the law.
Right.
What I'm saying to you is I'm not quite sure what the final variation will be, because there are 2 or 3 options to look at, but yes, it is our intention
what is
to
your
change the law. Well, we've always argued for grossly disproportionate as the test, that unless you act in a way that is deemed by the court and the prosecuting authorities to have been grossly disproportionate, then you would not be subject to prosecution. What that effectively means is we give the householder a pretty big comfort zone before the law could possibly intervene. None of us know how we would react in the situation where we were confronted by a violent burglar. We now know that this happens something like 23,000 times a year to people in this country. Very often these are not cases that come to court, but actually even if you get to the point where a case is considered by the prosecuting authorities, Crown Prosecution Service considers a very large number of cases, I don't think people should be put through that when they're defending their own interests.
Yeah, so I can use... Tories win election, you change the law, I'll be able to use disproportionate force, I just won't be able to use grossly disproportionate force.
Yeah. None of us know, you don't know, I don't know, how we would react to, for example, a situation where somebody was holding a knife to the throat of one of our children. And I don't think we would act in a way that would be something you'd look at in the cold light of day and say, well, maybe I should have done this or maybe I shouldn't have done that. You react in the heat of the moment. And I think we have to give the householder plenty of comfort to know that the law would be on their side unless they act in a way that people...
Aren't you replacing one subjective judgment, reasonable force, with another, even more subjective judgment, disproportionate?
Well, what we're saying, the message we're sending in making a change like that is, look, the law has to be absolutely fair and square on the side of the householder. You know, if you chase a burglar down the street, if you rugby tackle them to the ground, if you knock them senseless and then put a gun to their head and shoot them, of course, something like that is completely grossly disproportionate. But actually, we have to accept that people react and...
In some American states, that Clintwood-esque kind of style.
But we're not the United States. We don't have the United States.
The Make My Day law. You know, you come into my house, I'll have a Colt 45 waiting for you.
Well, of course, we don't have the gun culture in this country that they do there anyway. But the reality is, the law has to be, I think, on the side of the householder. And the householder needs to know that they don't need to take a step back and say, what can I do, what can't I do? We have to accept, in the heat of the moment, defending your family, defending your children, people will react emotionally, they will react perhaps sometimes in an over-the-top way. We can't judge them in the cold light of day against standards that would apply in the cold light of day when actually they've been put under enormous personal psychological pressure.
OK, well, let me turn now to Michael Wolkind to see what you make of that as a way of dealing with the law. Do you think the law does need to be changed, first of all?
Probably not. The law already recognises that people react a certain way in the heat of the moment, but grossly disproportionate is a horrible idea. So imagine, and I'm not sure whether this would allow people to respond outside the home or this is just for homeowners. If I'm outside the home and someone tries to abduct my child, why shouldn't I have the same rights to defend my child there as I would inside the home? And so I managed to tackle the criminal, and I get him to the ground, and I kick him once, and that's reasonable, and I kick him twice, and that's understandable. 3 times forgivable, 4 times debatable, 5 times disproportionate, 6 times it's very disproportionate, 7 times extremely disproportionate, in come the Tories test, 8 times grossly disproportionate. It's a horrible test.
But don't you think that it may be difficult to define in law, but in terms of public sentiment, that is what Chris Grayling has just outlined is exactly where the public is. You ought to be able to use all force necessary.
Well, some people think that. Not everyone thinks that. It sounds like state-sponsored revenge. I don't understand why sentencing should take place in the home. Why can't it go through the courts? Why can't the jury, as they always do, decide what's reasonable?
Well, what about that's a separate point as well, is this a matter for the police to decide or for juries to decide?
Well, juries decide at the moment whether the action of the householder or any victim is reasonable. And that's how it should be. Sentencing for the judge, for the police originally whether to prosecute. And there are cases where they don't prosecute, where the imbalance is so clear they don't prosecute to begin with.
But your client, Munir Hussain, does he feel that the law has worked well for him because he was originally given a custodial sentence?
He was, and that judge was sympathetic and went as far as any judge at first instance could do. It needed the Lord Chief Justice to come in and to give mercy to him.
But then if it requires the Lord Chief Justice, and there's going to be almost an established thing where someone uses self-defence, they get sent down to prison, and then it has to go through the appeal procedure, and the Lord Chief Justice kind of on a white stallion rides to the rescue.
No, it won't need that every time. Trial judges have now heard how the Lord Chief Justice approached this, and if there's another case where circumstances are so extreme, where someone has a character as impeccable as Munir Hussain and suffered as much as he did. It wasn't just a burglary, threats to kill, false imprisonment.
OK, we must leave it there, Mr Wolkind. Thank you very much indeed. Chris Grayling, let me come back to you. I just wonder whether you wanted to react to that, because clearly you haven't won over this particular barrister who's got very first-hand experience of the law, and he says it's working.
I think you have to remember that simply to go through the process of having your case considered by the Crown Prosecution Service, of coming to court before the judge ever gets to try you and form a verdict is absolutely, emotionally, personally, enormously destabilising and disruptive. I think that should happen in the rarest possible situations, and the default should be the police accept that there is that big comfort zone of protection of the household without ever having to put them through that process.
OK, let me just ask you